Well, he murdered two women near a ski resort in Colorado, and then he got trapped in a snowbank, nearly freezing to death. It wasn't until a passenger in a plane at 30,000 feet spotted him, and his rescue made national attention. Now, 40 years later, we're going to find out what an orange sock and a red glove had to do with this guy getting convicted as a serial killer. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this segment of Profiling Evil. I hope you're going to take a moment and hit that like and subscribe button, and make sure you're sharing our channel with all your friends. Hey, I'm sporting the new Profiling Evil t-shirt. Has a really cool design on the back, and I think you'd like it. Now listen, a Park County, Colorado court just found Alan Lee Phillips guilty of two murders in 1982. He killed 21-year-old Annette Schnee and 29-year-old Barbara Oberholtzen. Let's start by digging into the facts of this case. It was January 6, 1982, when 29-year-old Bobby Jo Oberholtzer left her ski resort job at Breckenridge, Colorado. Rather than go home, Bobby Jo called her husband and said she was going to meet some friends and that she'd catch a ride home with one of them a little later. Fell asleep after the call. He didn't wake until 2 o'clock in the morning, realizing that Bobby Jo had not returned. He called her friends, who stated that she left the bar that they were hanging out in at 7:30 p.m., and they all assumed she had a ride home. Well, Bobby's husband, Jeff, immediately called police, who told him it was too early to report her as a missing person. By morning, this guy was beside himself, and his fears worsened when he received a call from a farmer who reported he'd found Bobby Jo's driver's license, a backpack, and some other things. Oberholtzer and two of his friends responded to the area and started searching around, where they found the blue backpack and near it a red knit glove. Bobby Jo wore red knit gloves. Not thinking, they collected the items and they went to the sheriff's office, where a more formal investigation launched. And I'll tell you what, focus went in on the husband. Not only because he called at 2 in the morning, but he found crucial evidence. Now, media reports would suggest that Bobby Jo Oberholtzer was a meticulous kind of a person who could always be found carrying a notebook of plans that she had to build a horse corral. Now, she and her husband had been planning on building this for some time. This was a person who was into detail, and while she may have had a history of visiting too long with friends and associates, disappearing was completely outside of her character. She was a devoted mother to her 11-year-old daughter, who would never have the opportunity to grow up with a mom. Well, 2 hours after that farmer's call, police recovered Bobby Jo Oberholtzer's body about 15 miles to the south of her last known location, so just south of Breckenridge. It was near a scenic overlook. Now, old newspaper articles suggest that there was one set of footprints in the snow, although other testimony suggests that there actually was quite a bit of new snow, so determining how many footprints were there would have been difficult. But the clear statement was one set of footprints. Now, what was clear and evident was that Bobby Jo Oberholtzer had a gunshot wound, 2 of them, that likely caused her death. Police also found that she had a plastic zip tie around one of her wrists, and while clothed, she was only wearing one orange sock on her feet. Her jacket had blood on the sleeve, which law enforcement assumed was hers, since she bled to death at the recovery site from those bullet wounds. Still in her pocket were her house keys. Now, this was 1982, and DNA evidence wasn't advanced like it is now. They assumed that blood was hers, an assumption they shouldn't have made. Well, on that same day, 21-year-old Annette Schnee left her job at the Holiday Inn in Frisco, Colorado, which is just a little bit north of Breckenridge. She told everybody she had to run to Breckenridge to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription, and then she was going to hitchhike home. Well, she left the pharmacy sometime around 4 to 5 p.m. It was just getting to be dusk. Now, during the day, this woman worked as a hotel clerk, but at night, she worked at a local bar. Reports suggest again that she left that pharmacy somewhere around 4 or 5, and I'm not quite sure how accurate this is. You know, it gets dark that time of year at about that time. So what we do know is that she should have been hitchhiking to Blue River, which is about 5 miles to the south of Breckenridge. But you know, it would take 6 months before her body was found 16 miles southeast of Breckenridge. That's as far as the bird flies. But in reality, when driven on the roads, was 35 miles away. When Schnee was located, she was found by a boy who stumbled across her remains. She was lying face down in the stream, unclothed. Closer inspection showed that she'd suffered a gunshot wound to the back of the head. Now, the investigation of the discovery site also revealed a single orange sock, and it had a spot of blood on it. Police luckily collected the sock, but nobody tied it to the death of Oberholzer. Forensics determined that the blood on the sock, though, a few years later, wasn't from either victim, but was believed to be from an unknown male. Suddenly, police were dealing with a possible serial killer, and the case grew cold for nearly 39 years. Well, I'm a firm believer that there are eyes looking down on our planet, and from time to time, inspiration leads to solving crimes. Well, that heavenly oversight was literally what happened that night when Annette Schnee disappeared and when Bobby Joe Oberholzer was murdered. Several hours after these women were last seen, an off-duty police officer was riding in an airplane at 30,000 feet over the Colorado mountains. His name was Sheriff Harold Bray, and he noticed that some flashing lights in the Colorado mountains seemed familiar. The pattern really caught his attention, and he quickly notified the captain of the plane that he thought somebody was signaling for help. The flashing he saw consisted of 3 short bursts, 3 long bursts, and 3 more short bursts. Bray was a World War II Navy man, and he convinced the captain that it was an SOS signal, prompting the captain to notify authorities on the ground. Well, first responders were sent to the scene, and dispatch told them of how this all came about, and they reached out to a fire chief. When first responders arrived at the 10,000-foot snow-covered mountain pass, they found a man named Alan Lee Phillips stuck in a snowdrift. The temperatures were below zero, and the intoxicated driver would have likely frozen to death if that guy in the sky hadn't noticed his signals. Now, the 30-year-old man, again, Phillips, told Clear Creek Fire Chief David Montoya that he took a dangerous winter route home trying to just save some time. The chief was stumped because it was not a passable mountain at that time of year, but the fire chief continued to question him about other things that troubled him. For instance, a bump that he had on his head with some scratches and bleeding. Well, Phillips explained it away as an accident when he was trying to get the vehicle unstuck. The fire chief actually knew Phillips from a former mining job that they both had, and after driving him back to his home that night, the two never saw each other again. But the chief didn't forget that night. Let's listen as Chief Montoya reflects on that night with Matt Jablow of 9 News.
So I got my lunch and I took my radio with me, and dispatch called and said they had a call from a sheriff up there in the sky that said he saw SOS lights flashing on top of Cornell Pass. Wanted to know if anybody could check it out. Midnight, there was really nobody around. The sheriffs weren't around. So I said, look, I'm here now and I got my truck. So let me go see before you wake everybody up and see what it is. And my marshal from the Empire, he said, I'll join you up there. He says, go ahead on up and I'll meet you at the bottom. We'll see what's what and we'll make a little report. I said, okay. So I went up there, and about that time the snow really started coming back. And I got up there to the top, and sure as heck, there he was in his little pickup with the exhaust going out, and he saw me, and he freaked out. He said, "Ah, God, I'm saved." I pulled up, and he jumped out of the truck, jumped in my truck, and he says, "Man, am I glad to see you." I said, "What the hell are you doing up here?" And I recognized him. I knew who he was. And I said, "What are you doing up here?" He said, "Well, I got drunk, and I decided to go home." And I said, "You came up over the pass?" He says, "Yeah, well, it seemed like a good idea." I said, "Okay." So I said, "So what happened to your eye?" He says, "Well, I lost." This is when the plane passed over, it was clear and everything. He says, "I didn't know he saw me. I was going to try and walk out." And I said, "Okay, so what happened?" He said, "Well, the snow came back and it blinded me. I couldn't see the road and I couldn't see my pickup." So I started walking around in circles, he says, to try to find the truck, because he was up in that little parking area. Well, he found the truck, he said, face first. He said he ran into the corner of the cab. So after he got himself up, he went back into the truck and he waited to see if anybody was going to come. I came up about maybe 10 minutes later, because the wound was still fresh. I said, "Okay, so well, let's go down." I says, "I'll take you to the medics." He said, "Nope, no medics." He says, "I'm good." I says, "Well, you're a little bit drunk and everything." I said, you don't want me to check you out?" I said, "I'll fix you up and take you back to the house or take you down to 501 and they can take a look at you." He said, "No, I'm good. I'm ready to go. I got to go to work in the morning." And I said, "Okay." So he had the same shift I did. I said, "Okay, it's your call." So I dropped him off at the intersection of Georgetown exit and I-70, and he lived up the Trader houses at that time, and he walked up. I said, "I'll take you up to the house." He said, "No, you have to back out. I'm short." I said, "Okay, see you." A little bit drunk, but really happy to see me. He wasn't nervous, just really happy to see me, and stuff from the fact that he was hurting a little bit. He wasn't armed. There were no weapons on him. That's the first thing I noticed when I pick up anybody. They got a weapon on him, and he hadn't. At that time, I couldn't tell him he didn't have any. He had the coat on and stuff, but since I knew him, I really wasn't alarmed. So I said, "Okay, I'll take you back home and report that no medical was thing, and you probably won't have any contact with anybody." I says, "You're going to have to figure out a way to get your truck down yourself." He said, "Okay, I got that covered." And I never heard anything about it after that.
Well, after that, the years grinded by. Along the way, a retired Denver homicide detective by the name of Charlie McCormick moved to Breckenridge. McCormick was done with law enforcement. This guy was burned out. He had no interest in looking at murder cases ever again. But luckily, he was befriended by the local sheriff, who asked him to look at some unsolved murder cases he had. The Schnee and Oberholzer case. The cases had gone cold and there were no leads. Well, McCormick kindly consented, but privately figured that he just perused the documents lightly to satisfy the request. But from the moment he started studying the case, this detective was hooked. Before long, McCormick met with Schnee's family, and he secured a contract to represent them as a private investigator in the case. This guy charged them a whopping $1 per year. Now, that would have netted him about $39 over the last 39 years. He says the only reason he did the contract was to officially place him in a position to represent the family and work with law enforcement.
Well, as I say, I got here in '76, so I was here when it happened, which was 1982. And by the time it happened, I was well into my private investigative business. And I remember reading about it in the two local newspapers that we had and hearing about it. What I heard about and read about, I can remember distinctly thinking, man, am I glad I'm not doing this anymore, because you could tell it was an extremely difficult case. What little bit I knew about it then. And pretty much by then had the same attitude that I'd had it with homicide investigation. It was too stressful and I needed to do something else. And let's see, it was in 1989, so 7 years after it happened. I happened to be in the Justice Center here, and I ran into a Summit County Sheriff's detective who had been assigned to the case, and he'd been working it since 1984. And we got to talking, and I just said, "How's it going with that murder case?" And he said that we're about ready to put it on the shelf. And he said, "Would you take a look at it?" And I said, "Sure, I'll take the case books home." There were 2 5-inch case books at that time. There's over 50 now. So I took the 2 case books home, and I don't remember going to bed. Whatever fire had gone out was reignited, and I've been involved in it ever since. And back then, what we did is I contracted with the parents of Annette Schnee, the younger of the 2 girls, as a private investigator at $1 a year. And that gave me some standing to work the case with the sheriff's detective. When he retired in 1999, we lost any authority either one of us had really to investigate. So we approached and by that time we'd learned that there was DNA in this case. That was a big boost. We convinced the district attorney over in Park County to take jurisdiction of the case, which he should have from the beginning, because that's where both bodies were found, and most likely were both killed in Park County. And so he started a task force out of the district attorney's office, and the retired detective Richard Eaton and me were assigned as special investigators. So that gave us authority from 1999, 1999 on.
Well, it would take years for forensic science to catch up with the case. McCormick knew the blood on the socks didn't belong to either victim, but tying the evidence to an offender was an incredible long shot until ancestral DNA came into play. Now, testing was risky because there was only a small amount of evidence left. This is called investigative genetic genealogy. Some people just say IgG. And it's a new technique that is used in identifying criminal suspects. It comes with some controversy, but the technique involves uploading a crime scene DNA profile to one or more genealogy databases with the intent of trying to identify an offender's genetic relatives. Once they're identified to a family line, possible matches emerge, and eventually the most probable matches can be examined until a positive match is made. Investigative genetic genealogy became big news when it was used to identify the Golden State Killer back in 2018. And since then, hundreds of cases have been solved using this technique. McCormick leaned on IgG to drive the case forward.
And that helped a lot, because dealing with law enforcement agencies as a private investigator, they are very reluctant to give out any information.
And don't you also have a formal arrangement, or some kind? You have an arrangement with the Park County Sheriff's Department as well.
So that's the task force I was talking about.
Oh, that the DA set up, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that gave us both the authority that we needed to do whatever we needed to do.
Because I saw your card says you're a special investigator with the Park County Sheriff.
It actually has moved a couple of years ago. The task force moved from the DA's office to the Sheriff's Department.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. What was it about the case when you first stayed up all night reading those case books that attracted you to it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. The challenge, certainly, there were so many unanswered questions. There was a lot of problems with the investigation. There was too many jurisdictions involved in it. There was Park County, Summit County, Fairplay Police, Alma Marshall, CBI, Summit County, Breckenridge PD, everybody got into the act and nobody took charge. So looking through the files was really a disjointed effort because they were just paperwork not even signed, or you don't know who the author was, just thrown into boxes. And so there was a lot of questions. I had pages of questions of, well, what happened here? Where is this evidence? Who found this? So it evidently sought out that questioning in my mind, and that was the first step backwards or forward to get involved.
You've got 4 children. Are any of them daughters?
I have 3 daughters and 1 son.
And was that the fact that you had 3 daughters and 2 young women were killed? Is that, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
No, not really.
No. You didn't identify.
No. I probably have over the years, thinking about it, how sad it must be for the families, and the families have been, pretty close, especially, as I say, once we determined that we had some really good evidence, the DNA. It kind of got everybody's hope up a long time ago, but it got their hopes up.
So you had the $1 a year arrangement with one of the families. Did you have a relationship at all with the other family?
Not in that regard, no.
But did you gotten to know both the families well?
I got to know the family, Annette Schnee's family, probably a little bit better. And she's the one. She would come out here every year in January from Sioux City, Iowa, where she lived. That's where Annette Schnee was from. And the mother would come out here every year on the date of the death, January the 6th, and spend about 3 or 4 days just trying to find out what we were up to, what was going on. So she took an active interest in it from the beginning. The other family, as far as I know, did not. They were, just trying to put it behind themselves, I guess, and move on.
So you didn't have a personal relationship with the other family at all?
Well, I knew who they were. We talked a couple of times. And then we, on occasion, got together for TV filming. The case has been featured on 3 television programs. So the first one was in 1992, Unsolved Mysteries. There was leads that came out of that showing that gave us work for about 5 years. There was a lot of people called in with good information. Then I think in 2006, the Discovery Channel featured the deaths on a very different approach. They had 2 psychics who had a history of being helpful to the FBI. Came out here and took a look at it. We took them around to the location of where the bodies were found. They got to look at the evidence, which was mostly clothing belonging to the 2 women. And then in 2012, it was 2012 or 2016, I can't remember which, Paula Zahn, who has a program called On the Case, they featured this case again. And each time it was shown nationwide, we got all kinds of tips, some really good, some worth a lot of work, and some not so good.
This case is very personal for you, I gather, or not?
No, I guess it depends on what you mean by personal. I was not on a vengeance, seeking vengeance, or I was just trying to do a professional job and solve it.
I just meant you got to know the families.
Yes.
In that way, I don't mean personal vendetta, but
no.
Personal. You developed a connection to the families, and maybe, just that.
Yeah.
How would you describe your relationship with at least the Annette Schnee's family?
Well, with the mom, very good, very close. We talked a lot. She would send me Christmas cards. I would send her birthday cards and Christmas cards.
And how much work were you putting in this case for? I mean, obviously it would vary, but describe it roughly in a typical year, or what was the workload like?
Well, Probably, I did some work on it almost every day. Then, as I said, in 1996, with the advent of DNA technology becoming an investigative tool, we had all of our evidence, which is mostly clothing of the girls, plus their belongings that they carried in their backpacks. All that stuff in the backpacks had been thrown out along the road over a 22-mile area on 2 different roads over in Park County and in Summit County too. So we took all of our evidence and had it examined, and we knew that one of the pieces of evidence was a right wool glove that belonged to Bobby Joe Oberholzer.
Hey, do you remember me talking about that red glove that belonged to Bobby Joe Oberholzer? Well, that played big into this case, and it's another reason why it's so dang important the police hang on to evidence from these kinds of crimes forever until that thing is solved.
That, along with the backpack was a bloody glove and a cigarette butt. And so we had the only test you could do back in the 80s on blood was type. Mm-hmm. The type blood on the glove was the same as the victim's, same as Bobby Joe. And she had bled quite a bit from her gunshot wounds to the chest. So it was assumed it was probably her blood. But in 1996, we took it, the glove and some other evidence, to a private lab who was doing DNA work at the very beginning of the DNA work. And they gave us a report back that said this is not the blood of either victim. So I think it was about a year later, the art and the science got a little bit better. We gave it to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and they reported back not only was it was it the blood of either victim, but it was male.
Now, once McCormick and the task force had a sample, they started eliminating suspects. You know, there are 7.75 billion people in the world, and the forensic evidence centered on one person. And when it came back, that one person still lived in the same area where the murders occurred. What's even more amazing to me is that the same person that was stuck on that 10,000-foot mountain, spotted by a sheriff in an airplane flying overhead, and helped by a fire chief, was Phillips. A new district attorney met the task force investigating the case of Oberholzer and Schnee's murder. And in February of 2021, newly elected district attorney Linda Stanley, you remember the name from Morphew, and some of you have been frustrated, but if you go back and look, I was pretty pumped about this DA. Linda Stanley announced Phillips was being charged with 2 counts of homicide, 2 counts of assault, and 2 counts of kidnapping.
All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the Colorado Bureau of Investigations. My name is Tom McGraw. I'm the Sheriff of Park County. I'd like to thank members of law enforcement joining us today for this event. We have represented with us today, we have Lieutenant Steve Gramilli with the... All right, I want to thank the media for taking the time to join us today to provide more details so we can provide you with more details about the arrest involving the homicides of Annette Schnee and Barbara Joe, otherwise known as Bobby Joe Oberholzer. These 2 vibrant women with their lives ahead of them were last seen outside of Breckenridge in January of 1982. While they were not together at the time of their disappearance, they are forever connected through the suspect who allegedly took their lives and through the exhaustive work by investigators who never faded in their determination to solve these cases. Following their disappearance, after their last seen hitchhiking outside of Breckenridge in January 1982, Barbara Joe's body was located 1 day later. Annette's body was located approximately 6 months later, both in Park County. Before I announce the arrest, I want to focus on the most important part of this case, and that is Bobby Joe and Annette and their families. I cannot begin to understand the pain and sufferings their families have had to face for nearly 4 decades. With each year that has passed, they have remained vigilant in their unwavering commitment to seek justice for Bobby Joe and Annette. I'm here to tell them that their journey for justice, has a much clearer path. While the families did not want to speak today, understandably so, I have statements I'd like to read on their behalf. I pray that the arrest of Alan Phillips for the murder of my wife, Bobby Jo, and Annette Schnee will finally, after all these decades, bring closure and peace to this hideous nightmare for myself, along with all the lives he has horribly affected by his actions. I cannot thank enough all who never gave up the search for the truth. They are without doubt extremely dedicated and extraordinary individuals. Phillips is finally in the hands of the judicial system. May justice be served. This is from Jeff, better known as Obi Oberholzer, the wife of Bobby Jo. The husband, I'm sorry. His wife is Bobby Jo. I, the daughter of Bobby Jo Oberholzer, would like to thank both Charlie McCormick and Richard Eaton for never giving up on solving my mom's case. When I look into my child's blue eyes, which are truly beautiful like my mom's, I see her. I have lived with a monster in my mind since I was 11 years old, and now I can rest knowing justice will be served. That is Jackie Vukas Walker. She's the daughter of Bobby Jo Oberholzer. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank everybody who has been involved in the investigation of this case. It has been a mind-boggling affair. We finally have closure after 39 years. I thank you all. I am just in shock that this case has finally been solved and come to an end. Also, thanks to all the TV people with Unsolved Mysteries, Discovery Channel, and Paula Zahn. Thank you all for your efforts to help bring us closure. On February 24th, we arrested Alan Lee Phillips, date of birth February 6, 1951, for 2 counts each of first-degree kidnapping, first-degree assault, and first-degree homicide. He was arrested in Clear Creek County. He was taken to the Park County Jail, where he is now being held. It must be noted that the suspect is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This case began in collaboration with the United Data Connect and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, forensic, first-degree assault, and first-degree. We ask that you respect their privacy and not contact them at this time, as they do not want to speak publicly. I'd like to introduce Linda Stanley, the District Attorney for the 11th District. And like I said before, she was a great help in this case.
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Stanley. I'm the elected DA for the 11th Judicial District. I was sworn in on January 12th at about 8:15 in the morning, and I was in Park County at Sheriff McGraw's request that afternoon to talk about this case. For the last 6 weeks, as Sheriff McGraw had reiterated over and over, we were working day in and day out on this case. I was the only district attorney that received the information from the Park County Sheriff's Office. No one else in my office was privy to it and handled it accordingly, all the way up to the arrest date on February 24th.
Hey folks, we're talking about the conviction of Alan Lee Phillips, convicted for murdering 2 women 40 years ago. Now, I want to just take a moment and tell you that I use Truthfinder to help me better understand what Alan Lee Phillips has been doing for the past 40 years. I think you'd find it useful in locating lost loved ones, maybe an old friend from high school, or as a tool to check out that new babysitter. I put a code down below to give you a discount for trying them out, and you can cancel your subscription at any time. But please remember, Truthfinder's an affiliate. That means that I get a small commission if you sign up. It's about enough to buy a bag of chips and to have a soda. But now, let's get back to this case of serial killer Alan Lee Phillips. Well, Phillips was convicted this week of murdering Bobby Jo Oberholzer and Annette Schnee. During the trial, it sounded like the prosecution was painting a picture where Phillips abducted and killed Schnee before abducting and shooting and killing Oberholzer. He then turned around, drove back to the south, and then to the east, and then back to the north, driving over Guanella Pass to avoid any possible police presence. And he would have done that to just keep off that main highway and take the back roads home. Now, this information, if I've received it all accurately, was a little confusing to me, and I'd like to offer a different order of events based on my review of publicly available information. And I want to be clear, I'm speculating on what's been reported. I don't have the case folder, and I don't have the inside scoop, but I do have experience in examining criminal behavior and profiling criminal cases. So with that in mind, I'd like to suggest another theory, another series of events that would actually have Bobby Joe Oberholzer being the first victim of Phillips, with Annette Schnee being his second, and here's why. I find it very interesting that Oberholzer's body was discovered with 2 gunshot wounds, which ultimately caused her death. Her backpack and a red glove with Phillips' blood on it were discovered a long way from where Oberholzer's body was found. I believe that this was actually the initial contact site. I mean, it was a very cold night and it was snowing. Oberholzer may have been less discriminating based on weather conditions when she was out hitchhiking, and the hour of night or the number of vehicles may have influenced her decision to jump into his truck. When her body was recovered, it was near a scenic overlook, a pullout, where Phillips may have attempted to assault her again. In my mind's eye, I can visualize Phillips out hunting for a victim. And while murdering them was ultimately what happened, I believe he was fueled by a sexual fantasy. Like most fantasies, though, the reality of what happens doesn't fit the fantasy. And I say this because evidence suggests that the red glove was recovered in a different location than Oberholzer was recovered. And I suspect, again, it was the initial contact site and that there was a struggle at some point. I say this because that glove, remember, had Phillips' blood on it. Now, another option would certainly be that Phillips staged or discarded the backpack and glove and napkin after the fact. But regardless, Phillips' blood suggests that he was injured by Bobby Joe. She must have scratched and bloodied his face. Well, remember, Fire Chief Montoya remembers seeing Phillips on the mountain pass with a fresh wound on his face. It was there that he pulled into the scenic outlook, attempting to gain better control of his victim, or at least of assaulting there. Now, I'm theorizing, but I wonder if Oberholzer's escape of Phillips caused him to then start shooting at her. And the zip tie and that single orange sock would support this theory, and it would have been possible to determine the sexual assault given her body was recovered so quickly, but we don't know that information. Well, after losing Oberholzer, this frustrated predator probably returned to the Breckenridge area to hunt for another victim, a replacement. He'd failed once, and he wasn't going to fail again. He probably felt confident that he had eliminated Oberholzer. In fact, he could have shot her and left her, thinking that she was dead, and then she got up and ran further into the woods, where she was eventually discovered. Now, once Phillips abducts Schnee, he drove a back way toward his home, which would ultimately take him over that pass where he was rescued. Now, I'm suggesting this order because it appears he actually completed the assault and then executed Schnee with a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. He left her unclothed in the river bottom, where she was discovered 6 months later, further supporting this entire scenario. Satisfied with that second murder, he made his way over the pass where he became stuck and was later rescued. Now, this route makes best sense because while more dangerous, more perilous because of the amount of snow and the lack of road service, it was a road that was less traveled, affording him better odds of coming across a bystander, or worse, getting stopped by a police officer. Now, the only problem with my theory, folks, is that orange sock. But I think it's reasonable to theorize that the sock was left inside Phillips' truck after his struggle with Oberholzer, who escaped again, remember, and ran into the snow-covered forest with only one sock on her foot. Now, I believe an investigative miracle happened when that sock inadvertently fell out of Phillips' truck at the Schnee crime scene. And that sock helped prove that Alan Lee Phillips was a serial killer. So here's my question for all of you. Who do you think was the first victim, and who do you think was the second, and why does it matter? And do you think this convicted serial killer has more victims out there that we don't know about? I'm going to be watching for your thoughts down below, and make sure you're taking time to weigh in on each other's comments. Sentencing for Phillips will be on November 7th. We're going to be watching this one, and I want to know what you think is going to happen to Alan Lee Phillips. This guy is 71 years old right now. Hey, I want to encourage you to sign up for our channel memberships, and please stop right now and hit that like and subscribe button. Share Profiling Evil with your friends, and remember that you can find us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you like podcasts, folks, you can find Profiling Evil on your favorite podcast platform. Now, don't forget, check us out on the World Wide Web at profilingevil.com and sign up for the B.O.L.O. Hey, thanks for being with us, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.